You've just entered the No Delusion Zone. I'm David DeBatto. Today, my very special guests are Jonathan Sweet and Mark Toth. Both of them have been here before, and I'm really glad to have them back. Jonathan Sweet is a retired U.S. Army colonel, served for over 30 years in the military intelligence branch. Since retiring, he has become a journalist of sorts. He's published and written many articles for such publications as The Hill, the New York Post, the Kiev Post. He's appeared many times on TVP World, Fox News, and many others. His partner today is, as I said, Mark Toth. Mark Toth is a journalist by profession as well as a successful businessman. He specializes in writing about military and foreign policy matters. Like John, he has been published in The Hill, the New York Post, the Kiev Post, and appears also on TVP World, Fox News, many others. It is my great pleasure to have them both back on with me today. John and Mark, welcome back.
David, thanks for having us back on the show.
David, great to be back. Thank you.
You bet. Well, we're going to talk about what we've talked about the last few times, but it's only gotten a little bit worse. Well, a lot worse, actually. And that is, of course, what's going on in Iraq. See, I was just thinking about my past in Ukraine and to a lesser extent in Saudi Arabia with the negotiations and just what's going on recently. Look, the last time we were on, I think I mentioned that prior to him being appointed as a special emissary for the Ukrainian negotiations by President Trump, I had pretty good respect for General Kellogg. I don't know him. I've never met him, but I have read a lot about him. He's had an extremely honorable and distinguished career. And I always thought of him as a straight shooter, a very patriotic gentleman and honest. Unfortunately, like many others, in fact, almost all the others who have joined the Trump administration, I don't have any respect for him anymore. And I'll tell you why. And I'm going to read a quote from General Kellogg that was just made. Hold on here. Here we go. This was over a recent meeting that he had with, actually, it was a speech that he just made. So I'm going to quote, just if you bear with me. Retired Lieutenant General Keith Kellogg, President Trump's special envoy for Ukraine and Russia, says Ukrainians brought the pause in U.S. intelligence sharing on themselves. It's, quote, sort of like hitting a mule with a 2x4 across the nose, Kellogg said, of the impact of the intelligence pause on the battlefield. Got their attention. The intelligence the U.S. has been sharing has been critical in helping Ukraine and Russian to strike Russian military targets as well as anticipate and block Russian attacks. But it's a pause. It's not an end, Kellogg told CBS News. But it's sort of like, okay, we're trying to get your attention. There's more. I'm not going to read it. That pisses me off, gentlemen. I'm not happy with that. It's like hitting a mule across the face with a 2x4 to try to get their attention. I think Ukrainians' attention has been got for 11 years, and certainly the last 3+ years, and they've been hit with a lot more than a 2x4 across the face. So not only is that insulting, it's condescending, and to me, what do I know? It shows that he's fully drunk the Kool-Aid in the Trump administration. And he's gone down many pegs, in my opinion. I used to respect him. I'll be honest. I don't right now. Thoughts?
Look, very familiar with the quote. Mark and I have used it, I think, a couple times in some of our latest articles that we've written in the Kiev Post, but also for the Daily Mail. Look, I agree, with everything you said. The thing I think, in addition to just being disappointed with General Kellogg, but it's also with the other selections too. You mentioned Rubio, Waltz. They've all, in a sense, fallen into the same sphere of influence under the Trump administration. Quite frankly, we don't understand why. So maybe there's this plan that they bought into. They're just not sharing the plan with us. One, the thing I think that really befuddles me the most is the more Putin says no, the more the Trump administration provides them. Putin says no, Trump says we'll make them have elections. Putin says no, Trump says we'll shut off intelligence. Putin says no, we'll get them to stop striking you the deep targets. Putin says no, we'll take away your F-16s. It's turning the screws on Ukraine to get them to the negotiation table while lavishing Putin gifts to bring him in. And Putin understands that as long as he keeps saying no, that Trump will continue offering things. And as long as he keeps saying no, he'll continue to strike targets in Ukraine, both civilian targets and military targets. It's a pathway, obviously, to nowhere, and it's very frustrating to watch. So, Mark, what are your opinions?
Yeah, I share everyone's amazement at the turnaround in Kellogg. It's been disappointing, stunning, unacceptable. He seems to miss that he got hit by a 2x4 too. Putin, Lavrov, they hit him with the 2x4 saying, "We don't want you to be part of these negotiations." And that seems lost on Kellogg. He doesn't seem to understand that his military background, his ability to look at this from a strategic standpoint, was all something that was feared by Moscow. And so they kicked him in the face and got him out of the way. And now he's just been relegated basically to a messenger kid between Trump and Zelensky, and replaced or usurped, whatever word you want to use, by Steve Witkoff, Trump's Mideast envoy. So, from that standpoint, it's just disappointing to me that Kellogg isn't reading the room better than he is, that he's not realizing that he's been marginalized, and that he's not taking that opportunity, having been marginalized, to draw a line in the sand to say, look, this isn't acceptable. Instead, he's just being obsequious to the president and continuing, to want to have a seat at the table, even though basically he's in the second or third row at this point. Deeply disappointing.
Well, that has happened to everyone who used to be, in quotes, anti-Trumper, especially Republicans or military personnel that are now part of his cabinet, or in General Kellogg's case, a special envoy. I have to ask you, because I go through this every day and I still don't have an answer. I respect both of your opinions on this. How could someone, we'll get to Marco Rubio in a minute, how could somebody with, as I said, a distinguished career, I think it's 40 plus years in the U.S. military, retired as a lieutenant general. How could he have such a turnaround and not do as many has suggested, just resign, just fall on his sword and do the honorable thing and say, I can't do this, it is dishonorable, and walk away? What's your honest opinions on why he doesn't do that?
Don't know. I can't get into the head, obviously, of General Kellogg. Again, I fall back on the position, or at least the thought of, there's a plan out there they've all bought into that they're not sharing with us, that we simply don't understand by what they're doing, in the open. And that's the only thing the only rationale I could come to, because you have, smart men, Rubio, Waltz, General Kellogg, and others who are engaged in this process, who seemingly have completely flipped in many ways. Look, even the speaker, who 8 months ago approved the Ukraine, funding package, who pushed it through against the will of Trump and against the will of many Republicans, who's now completely flipped and says, Zelensky needs to be out and we need to have peace. Please, if there's a plan, share it with us, because in the meantime, you're leaving everyone in the United States, but equally as important, and probably even more important, our European allies and Ukraine, out in the dark. And it's forcing them to make decisions that aren't necessarily in the best interest of world security. You got Poland wanting nuclear weapons now because they're not confident that NATO is going to help them. Germany's doing the same thing. France is offering umbrellas, for the European continent. So it's not Zelensky that's pushing the world towards World War III. It may be Trump that's pushing Europe into a position that could set off conditions for a third World War. Mark?
Yeah, I think there's two, again, I can't get into his head either, but I think there's two explanations here. One is you're just close to power, and it's hard to give that access up. The White House, the Oval Office, is alluring. That's where people want to be. That's where decisions are made, and it may just be hard to say, I don't want to be part of that anymore. It could be that Kellogg has made this decision that he's Zelensky's best chance to try to communicate to him what the reality is of Trump's positions. And from that standpoint, he views himself as the unwanted messenger, but the necessary messenger. Again, that's a charitable explanation of it. Personally, I concur with John. I think he's in resignation territory. Why he hasn't is something that only General Kellogg can answer to. But that's sort of my take. And I agree with John that what's happening here, more important than just the personalities involved here, is the second and third order effects of all of this is having in terms of the U.S. position abroad. Our allies don't trust us anymore. Potential defense departments, in Europe are saying basically, look, can we buy weapons anymore from the U.S.? Are they going to turn them off like they did the F-16s in Ukraine? Are we going to be faced with having a military but not having one because it doesn't work? It's just like he's not understanding the damage that he's doing, the nuclear proliferation potential that John raised, as well as what China is assessing all of this to be, which I think is a sign of weakness. None of it is good at a strategic level.
The so-called rare earth deal, which was ostensibly what Kellogg was talking about most recently, again, in his comments. What do you both think about that? I mean, if number one, that was a mafioso type of a deal. That was a protection racket. I've never seen or heard of anything like that coming even remotely close from an American president before. But be that as it may, if Zelensky had signed any one of the different iterations of that agreement, do you really believe, in your professional opinions, that that Trump, the Americans, would have provided some kind of security guarantee for Ukraine had Zelensky signed one of the rare earth mineral transfers to the United States?
I don't think so. I think going into that that discussion or going into that signatory phase in the Oval Office, the United States had no and told Ukraine to that effect that they had no intentions of providing security guarantees, that this was an economic security guarantee. But as Mark and I have written, economic security guarantees don't stop ballistic missiles and drones from striking Ukrainian cities. Economic security guarantees don't stop human wave assaults on a daily basis, resulting in casualties upwards to 1,300 a day on the Russian side alone. They don't stop the Russian forces from flowing into the country. They don't stop, Iranian and North Korean weapons and soldiers, from entering into the battlefield. It's not a guarantee. It is what you just said. It's line my pockets. It's an extortion deal. It's what can I get out of this? At least that's what it perceives to be on the at perception. I mean, at the level that we're looking at. It just seems like, just like you said, it's extortion, and it is just another version of what Mark and I have called, the president's aspirations of being Don of the Donbass. He wants access to monies. I think yesterday he said the same thing on the aircraft, on Air Force One, when he turned around and said, the United States is going to be rich beyond our wildest dreams. Well, it doesn't matter if you're rich and you're not happy, and you're rich and you can't share that with somebody else. If you're rich and you can't share it or you're not happy, you're miserable. And that's kind of the course I think we're being taken down. Mark?
Yeah, the original deal especially was a shakedown. I mean, it was classic extortionism. There's no way to look at it. The subsequent deal, which was basically a 50-50 partnership, which did call for U.S. investment, was far more equitable. So to be objective here, it got a lot better. The deal that wasn't signed in the White House was better. Now, whether that deal is still on the table, no one knows, because Trump has said, I want to get more concessions now. So is he going back to that original extortion deal? Is it no longer a 50-50 deal if it were to get signed? Who knows? We might learn more from the meetings that are happening today between Marco Rubio and Andrei Yermak, who's Zelensky's chief advisor, and it's happening in Riyadh. Sorry, happening in Jeddah in Saudi Arabia. But from that standpoint, I do think, I may differ a little bit from John here. I do think in terms of potential security guarantees, it may have led to a kinetic kind of security guarantee down the road. We'll never know until it gets done. Because if you do start pouring that kind of investment, that amount of money into that type of fund, a reconstruction fund that was going to do ports, extract rare earth minerals from around Ukraine. You're talking substantial US dollars that would have to be put in there, numbers of American contractors and experts and so forth. So there would have been American interest to defend, and whether or not that would have led to, a stronger security guarantee. I think you have to keep that door open that it could have. And there were hints to that when Trump met with Keir Starmer, the British Prime Minister, the day before the blow up in the Oval Office. He said when the issue came up, well, what if British peacekeepers were coming under attack in Ukraine? He's like, look, we're not going to let the British get attacked. We'll have their back. So there were signs that he was willing to get there kind of in a backhanded kind of way. He's just not willing to come out and say it publicly that he's going to do it or make any kind of public commitment to it. But again, I think that's all moot at this point because I think there's a much bigger issue on the table. What we're faced with here is what does this future peace look like? And John and I were talking about this before we came on air. There are three different kinds of peace right now. There's the peace that Zelensky wants, which is making sure that Russia doesn't invade Ukraine for a third time. There's the piece that Trump wants, is transactional, line my pockets as quickly as you can, and so that I can pivot to China. And then there's the piece that Putin wants, which is, hey, I'll take a ceasefire if it means I can come back for a third bite at this. So peace, as John told me, and give him credit for this, it just depends whose definition you're going by here.
Well, I just want to follow up on a couple of things that you both said is in terms of the rare earth deal, and I don't want to stay on this too long, but in terms of the rare earth deal, if it had been signed with really no solid security guarantees, but a substantial American investment, and I had this thought, and I haven't seen a lot about this thought or theory yet. My feeling is, based on everything that's been said and done by Donald Trump and his administration, I wouldn't put it past them not only to not defend the American interests there and Ukrainian interests there, but to share it or work a deal out with Russia to cooperate in exploiting all of the minerals and rare earth resources in Ukraine. And what would stop them? The Ukrainian army couldn't stop them because at this point there would be American contractors and then the Russian military still in eastern Ukraine. Any thoughts about a American-Russian collaboration in exploiting the rare earth in Ukraine should this deal eventually be signed?
Certainly a worst case scenario, and I'm sure many others have thought that as well. Given a lot of discussion going on, both on social media, but also in the major network news as far as the relationship that Trump has with Putin. So definitely a possibility. I'm not sure it's a strong possibility. Is when you get into courses of action, it's probably the least likely course of action. But nonetheless, something that could happen should Ukraine fall, and then looking to maintain ownership, if you will, of certain areas within the Donbass to extract minerals from. So it's a possibility, but unlikely from my perspective, Mark.
Yeah, I concur with John here. I think if you step back, that yes, maybe what's fueling this a little bit is there's this notion by the Trump administration that they can peel off Russia from China in terms of their no limits partnership that's come about. That's not happening. That's gone too far down the road. If you're Putin, and I keep saying this online to people that bring this up, if you're Putin, all right, maybe you feel comfortable with Trump in office, that you're going to get a more advantageous dealings with the U.S. But what happens after Trump is out of office? Then you've just screwed China. You've told them, now I'm going to have a closer relationship with the U.S. I don't think that's a good long-term bet for him, and I doubt he makes it. In terms of Ukraine itself and the REM deal, they've got a voice too. And there's another player here that we've not talked about that's already made investment in a commitment, which is still yet to be finished, which is China and its Belt and Road Initiative, which has two key rail arteries that are scheduled to go through Ukraine itself. They want to stay in those rare earth minerals as well. John and I have written about that. And so you've seen some overtures coming out of Kiev saying maybe we need to circle back to the Chinese because they may be our best partner in terms of exploiting and capitalizing on those rare earth minerals, which is what China wanted to do all along. They've been doing that in Africa. They're doing it around the world, and Ukraine makes the most sense with that 11.5 trillion worth of value there. So I don't think it would be that easy for Putin and Trump, even if they wanted to, just to carve it up. There are other players there, including Ukraine itself, as well as China. They're going to say not so fast.
Let's talk about one of the other players, Turkey. Erdogan made some really interesting statements not too long ago about how he could be Turkey might be enticed to providing peacekeepers if the situation were right. What do you think about Turkey being actively involved in any peacekeeping efforts should eventually a peace treaty of some kind be negotiated?
I'm not in favor of it. Look, Turkey is a NATO partner. Roger, got it. But this is the same Turkey, that has publicly stated their position on Israel. This is the same Turkey that aligns itself with Syrian rebels that overthrew the Assad government. And not that they are a bad thing, but they are comprised of former ISIS members and Al Qaeda members. So I wouldn't allow, from my perspective, again, I don't think Turkey's in the best interest. Now, Russia would agree to it, which is exactly why we shouldn't agree to it. And then the other piece is China's offer to put soldiers in there also as peacekeepers. And I think that's a bad idea too. China doesn't need to have soldiers on the European continent, and quite frankly, Turkey doesn't need to be in there either. You do not need, I don't think, to expand Turkey's regional influence. Okay, and by putting them there, you'll do just that. Look, David, did you serve in Bosnia at all? Were you present
I
there?
did not. No, I was serving, but I did not go to Bosnia. Didn't deploy.
Yeah. So the Turks did, obviously. The Turks who were in Srebrenica, which is where the Muslim enclave was, protecting the Muslim people, as they should. Okay, they felt as though they were protectorates there, and that's fine. That was their role at the time. There's not a Muslim enclave in Ukraine for them to protect, so they don't have any business, from my perspective, being there. And I'm sure the European Union wouldn't want them either. Mark?
Yeah, no, I concur. John said it best. There's just no place for them being there any more than there's a role for the Chinese to play. I think if any peacekeeping force is to be respected, it's going to have to be made up of European peacekeepers that have sided with Ukraine, not ones that have kind of been on all sides of the equation. Because lest we forget, a lot of oil transaction, the shadow fleet has also gone through Turkey. So Erdogan's very good at playing it both ways, and not a guy to be trusted.
Well, I mean, the pendulum is swinging, of course, directly at Europe. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about NATO. Let's talk about Europe. Let's talk about the EU. First of all, do you think, either one or both of you, that in lieu of the statements and actions coming from the United States under Donald Trump, that Europe, whether with the EU and or NATO, is going to be able to act fast enough to fill in the gap? Not totally, it's impossible. Are they going to be able to protect Ukraine, to allow Ukraine enough time to stabilize the front and produce their own weapons and ammunition, to the fact that then eventually they could take it back to Russia? Are they going to be able to stabilize Ukraine, or is that wishful thinking? Is NATO and Europe and the EU going to be able to do it?
Look, as an alliance, as a NATO alliance, and as a European Union alliance, the answer is no. Because there's too many veto votes that are involved in the European Union and in NATO. Hungary gets a vote, Slovakia gets a vote, and unfortunately, based upon what we've seen in the last couple of weeks, the United States gets a vote. So what they're going to need is what happened the day after the Oval Office meltdown, which is a summit of European nations that are going to act on a multilateral basis that is non-alliance, is going to support Ukraine individually or as a multi-alliance type of organization. Okay. And there have already been overtures. Norway has provided funds. United Kingdom's made commitments. France has made commitments. But it still comes down to, these are so far have all been photo ops. These have all been press conferences. These have all been well-wishing. I'm not sure, and maybe, I don't have firsthand ground truth, but I'm not sure the first weapon or the first piece of munition or the first piece of intelligence has been shared with Ukraine, given those types of discussions. I'm not sure if that's going on. I know that's what they envision and that's what they want, but the speed of Europe sometimes is not conducive to Ukraine winning. And already we're seeing repercussions on the battlefield, particularly in the Kerch region. While at the same time, we're also seeing some successes from Ukraine in the Donbass. So it's a mixed message. I just
Well,
don't see.
John, let me jump in there because I have to ask specifically about the intelligence, which that's your background specifically. As we know, Trump pulled back and then put back in the intelligence sharing with Ukraine. Who knows where that's going to go in the next few days or weeks? Does at this point any individual European country or NATO country or EU or any combination thereof have the ability to even partially supply Ukraine with the intelligence sharing assets that they will need to defend themselves against Russia and take the place of what the United States may, in fact, in the future, pull back again?
So in my mind, the short answer is yes. Look, if Five Eyes goes to Four Eyes, but our partners have capabilities to provide that level of intelligence. Maybe not to the same granularity that the United States is able to based upon our intelligence architecture and the defense intelligence enterprise, but enough to provide targetable data for weapon systems, enough to alert Ukraine onto Russian movements and what's happened. I think at that level, the short answer is yes, at a Four Eyes level.
John, let me ask you this because I don't know the answer. You probably do. Sure. Much of the focus has been on satellites, of course. They provide, I would think, the lion's share of the intelligence. But what about ground-based assets? There are ground-based assets, intelligence gathering assets that exist throughout Europe and maybe even in the Black Sea or further away. Are there any of those that can also be put to use aside from satellite-based intelligence gathering assets?
Well, so the answer to that is probably yes. I say probably. I just don't know what assets are on the ground. I can tell you that there's assets that are that look for radars. There are assets that are looking for launch sites. There are assets, non-human assets that are looking for particular indicators on the battlefield. So the answer to that is yes. The drones primarily are the single one asset, the reconnaissance and surveillance drones that the Ukrainians have in multitude, okay, that they can find in targets in Ukraine and probably in the Kursk Oblast, okay. Those deeper targets, though, they're going to have to rely upon other intelligence gathering. And look, Maxar was a great tool, an over the shelf, off the counter, whatever you want to describe as something you can call and get, intelligence on an unclassified level. Yeah, that was available. But yes, I think Europe can provide that level of detail for them. Look, they're not tied, if you will, to a Starlink type of enterprise as far as a constellation of satellites. Europe has similar, but just not at the depth that Musk had been providing. And again, Musk hasn't turned it off. He said he hasn't turned it off. But the intelligence sharing obviously is reducing Ukraine's ability to defend itself. So it is reducing, it is having an impact. Okay, but that impact can be overcome both with the European Union. But let's also remember that Ukraine has a pretty robust intelligence gathering capability also, both from a human perspective, but also from the EW perspective on the ground. So I wouldn't count Ukraine out. These guys have been innovative and adaptive in every other way. I see them overcoming this challenge too. What do you think, Mark?
No, I agree. Going back to the original question there, Europe has got to get a sense of urgency, and they're showing signs of it, but it's not quite there yet. I mean, if you look at Ursula von der Leyen's plan, the 800 billion European euros that was adopted unanimously, I might add, which is a good thing. Nonetheless, it's still spread out over 4 years. And so when you look at the Russian threat, it's now. You're facing a Russian economy that's spending upwards of 7% of its GDP on its war economy. And it's basically a full war economy. So you've got to keep up with that. And then as John and I wrote in a couple of articles recently, we pointed out the purchasing parity that you've got to factor into this. It appears on surface that the EU is spending more than Russia. But actually, when you do purchasing power parity, you actually do the calculations, Russia is slightly getting more bang for their buck or more bang for their ruble than Europe is for their euro. And so they're slightly falling behind. They're not ahead. Now this 800 billion helps, but it's not enough quick enough, nor does it address the immediate concerns that Ukraine is facing along the battlefronts, both on the Donbass as well as on Kurds. And John and I wrote about that for The Hill. We basically said, look, there is a thin red line right now for Europe. Let's zoom out a bit. Let's not just look at this as a fight for Ukraine for its own freedom, but in terms of what potentially it means for Europe. Where like Europe, you've got to understand, forget Washington at this point. You can't rely on that. You really need to understand that this thin red line in Ukraine has got to be backed up. And there are some helpful signs that are coming. This idea of a nuclear umbrella, which might get Europe to be a little bit more bold, that French President Emmanuel Macron was proposing, would be a good thing, because you've got Germany exposed, you've got the Baltic states exposed. Poland realizes it is, because they're even talking, do we need to get our own nuclear weapons? So the idea that you could have some kind of nuclear umbrella that falls outside of NATO, falls outside of the US guarantees, would be a good thing. The UK so far, I don't believe, has chimed in on that. They obviously have their own nuclear capabilities. But having said that, in terms of euros, there's only so many euros to go around. And as Ben Hodges said, it's really, really expensive to carry a nuclear force. It's not cheap to maintain that kind of lethal capability. And so from that standpoint, for now, it would be sufficient that France and ideally the UK could provide that. But really what this comes down to, in my mind, is how do you backstop the intelligence sharing things? John just covered that. How do you get more munitions, more artillery, et cetera, there into the battlefield? And how do you get the messaging to Putin that, look, no matter what capitulating you think Trump's going to be doing, we as Europe are not going to do that. And there are signs that that messaging is getting through. Moscow's kind of going crazy, saying Europe's trying to get in the way. They want their cake and they want to eat it too, if you're Russia. But, it's there for Europe to take a leading role, but they're going to have to start sacrificing, and they're going to have to realize that they've got to reconfigure the economies more than they have today. Right now, it's all talk. I haven't seen any, added production immediately. No emergency decrees. No, like we've got to spend this right away. They're basically fleshing out a framework, but there's no action this day, to put it in Churchillian terms. Where's the action behind all of this talk? Yet to be seen.
I agree with you. I mean, and we've all been writing about this and speaking about it. Perhaps me more vocally and loudly than perhaps you two have. But Europe has been not disgraceful, but glacial in their realization of the danger. And it's just very recently that they're starting to get it. But I agree with both of you. They are starting to get it. But I think we need to get past the starting gate really, really fast, like yesterday. They need to start ramping up their production. And that's my next question. I keep reading about was it Pistorius in Germany has said several times, including recently, that if Germany went to war tomorrow against Russia, they would have about 3 or 4 weeks worth of ammunition. Is it possible? Can any individual European nation ramp up their defense industries very fast within the next several months in order to meet an attack by Russia, or even to supply Ukraine with the ammunition that they've been begging for, specifically artillery ammunition and, of course, anti-aircraft? Do they have the political will? They've got the capacity. Do they have the political will to do that? Either one of you. Are they going to do it, and are they going to do it fast enough?
So I'll lead off. So the short answer is yes, they can. Okay, but it comes down to just what you said, will. Okay, and political will is one. Schultz didn't have the political will. His successor seems to have the political will, but you have to turn it on. You can't keep talking about turning it on. At some point, you got to do it. And they're not at that point yet, because it's still not real to them. Look, they're still buying Russian gas. They're still buying Russian oil. They are funding the war that they're afraid is approaching their borders. And it's like, can't get there from here. It really is. It just drives you absolutely insane when you see what they say, what they do, and what's happening.
Well, Germany still has that law that they have to change about putting not being able to fund these defense-related activities. They have to supply the health net, the safety net within their country before they can do anything about, or no, balanced budget. Excuse me. They have to have a balanced budget, even if they're at war. And now they're considering changing that law. So I agree with you. This is insane. When are they going to do that?
It's a built-in excuse, okay? It's something they can fall back on. Look, if you want to change, you change. Okay. If people tell you you can't look, and this is an example, but the example is, I mean, they told us it would take 6 years to develop a COVID vaccine. Trump did it in 6 months. You know why? Because he broke through all the bureaucratic barriers. Okay. They compressed timelines, they took risk, and they came up with a solution.
What is it going to take, John, Mark? What's it going to take for Europe to do that, to break through the political and bureaucratic bullshit, to actually prepare for war with Russia and to help Ukraine defend against Russia? What's it going to take? What act or action is going to have to happen?
I think it's gonna take Russia doing something kinetically in one of the NATO states that it brings them to that attention, okay? And Russia is deliberately not going to do that. They're going to get right up on the edge. They're going to keep pushing, but they're not going to do it because Russia does not want to fight NATO, even if it's United States-less NATO. They do not want to be engaged in that fight because they're fully committed to Ukraine and they're naked everywhere else. What Russia does have is a strategic deterrence, but they don't have a tactical capability to do anything to NATO. They can throw bodies at NATO, but NATO does have weaponry to take care of bodies. The strategic deterrent is what he has. Mark, what are your comments?
Yeah, I think if you look at this at high altitude, Europe doesn't necessarily have to do this as quickly as one might think, because they have an option. It's called Ukraine. So they can take the resources that they have instead of worrying about fighting Russia in 4 months, right? Time. They can use that 4 month of ammunition and supplies to make sure that Ukraine can fight it. And it might add, it does take time. John and I wrote about this in several pieces, maybe 2 years ago. The curing of artillery, the powder itself, sometimes certain variants can take 7 to 10 months. It's not like you can just turn on a switch and go, boom, here's artillery shells, right? It takes time. So Europe needs a plan, an interim plan, if you will, until they can ramp that production up. And absolutely, they should be ramping that kind of production up. They need to get that going. But they have these options. Ukraine is willing to fight this war. They've been fighting this war. They've got an army already on the ground. Russia is too stretched to fight anywhere else. So you know where the battle lines are. Aside from hybrid warfare, asymmetric warfare that might come about, the main kinetic fights are where they are, Kursk, along the Donbass, etc. The other thing that Europe can do that would not be a problem and would dramatically, in my opinion, and I want to let John chime in because he's the military expert here, not me, is that the thing that could dramatically change the equation is Sky Shield. This idea that you would take 120 Eurofighters, put them in the air. John and I called for this, God, a year and a half ago, John, something like that, for a no-fly zone in Western Ukraine. To do two things: to protect civilian population centers in Kiev and in Lviv, but also to allow Ukraine to push forward their air defenses into the battle zones so that we're getting tied down in these civilian population centers. That would dramatically change, in my opinion, what we're seeing, happening in the Donbass would give Ukraine a huge advantage. But John, that's more of a military issue, so I'm going to punt it back to you on that one.
Sure, and just as Mark said, the no-fly zone is a step. It's one of 3 steps that Mark and I have mentioned repeatedly, but most recently in the Kiev Post and in the Hill. It's that air cover is necessary, but in order for Ukraine to make any pathway forward, they have to be successful in interdiction. Okay, they have to be successful in deep strikes, and they have to be successful in the close fight. Those 3 outcomes, in addition to the air cover, is the only way Ukraine can move forward. Ukraine can push Russia out of their country. And there's too many people out there that don't believe Ukraine can win this war. But it's not about defeating Russia. It's about defeating Russia's ability to sustain a war. And when you defeat the ability to sustain a war, then they'll have to withdraw. They can do that with those tools that Mark and I have just mentioned. But it does begin first with the air cover that allows Ukraine to rebuild itself, that allows Ukrainian forces on the ground to maneuver. And without that, the other three just kind of are mute.
Well,
Yeah, if I could quickly
please,
add here,
Mark. Yeah.
I mean, one thing that is abundantly clear is that the NATO aircraft, and obviously would be individual European countries' aircraft, far outclass what the Russians have. I mean, this is not an even fight. Russia would not have the capability, and they haven't even been able to go up against the Ukrainian Air Force effectively. And they're struggling to deal with the F-16s that are there currently. So, I mean, this idea that you'd put 120 planes, Sky Shield is being proposed. General Hodges has been a big proponent of this and pushing it. In my mind, it would be very transformative and would create this huge advantage for Europe. And it's one that they need to be doing. I'm all for it. I mean, yes, are there risks? Yes, does it bring European countries into close contact with Russian aircraft? Absolutely. But at this point, if you really believe that the fight is in Ukraine, if you really believe, as Donald Tusk has said, the Polish Prime Minister, and as well as Friedrich Merz, the Chancellor to be in Germany, that war is coming our way, then you have to take these risks. You have to start doing it so that you deter Putin, because he doesn't have the cards to play in terms of going up against either NATO or a combined Euro Air Force in Ukraine. I think it'd be a smart move to do.
Well, the people that talk about the fallacy that Ukraine can't win this war, can't defend themselves against Russia, which primarily, I'm sorry, does come from the Republican side. I guess, I don't know, they're thinking about a Napoleonic war where the Ukrainians are going to march into Moscow and try to oust Putin out of the Kremlin physically. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about defeating Russia, from winning in Ukraine, from denying Russian forces to occupy Ukraine, to defend the territorial integrity of Ukraine. That's what we're talking about. A couple of things though on the Sky Shield. I've advocated that since forever, and I know you, like you just said, you have for years. A couple of things about that, and I've talked to Ben Hodges about this. It's not just defending the skies over Ukraine for various reasons. It would be the rules of engagement, because Russia's going to shoot at those airplanes from Russia, most likely. What are going to be the rules of engagement? Are those aircraft or artillery even on the ground going to be able to return fire into Russia? Into the airfields where the Russian aircraft take out from or take off from. That's a huge issue that they're going to have to settle before you put any kind of a sky shield, close the skies over Ukraine, which well, could you address that? Just the rules of engagement if your sky shield actually went into effect.
No, that is that's a very real constraint. Okay, but at the end of the day, if you're going to put aircraft up there, you got to let them defend themselves, okay? And it doesn't do any good to put them up there and expose them if you don't have a reaction arm to take care of the problem. Okay, all you're doing is a show of force that, quite frankly, Russia doesn't respect. The only thing Russia is going to respect is when they fire a ballistic missile at you, or they fire a ground-to-air missile at you, is that you take it out. That they respect, because then they'll stop shooting at you. Okay, they don't want you to shoot at them, but they think, and rightfully so, that you're not going to shoot back. We haven't shot back. Okay, that's not what we have done. So therefore, why would we start doing it? So it's toothless if you don't make the rules of engagement such that they can fire at what is being fired from towards them. Mark.
No, I agree. I do think, though, it's important to understand from Russia's perspective that look at what they've done. Anything that's been brought kinetically to the European side of the table has been through hybrid warfare, sabotage, espionage, influence peddling, and the like. They're not ready to go, I think, mano a mano with the West, especially not with NATO. They may talk the talk, their state-controlled media may fantasize about it, but it's not something that militarily they've been willing to do. And so I think from Europe's standpoint, they've got to recognize that. They hold a strength here. They realize Russia has no answers to it if it became kinetic, and they need to get that force put into place as quickly as possible. Now, are there risks? Yes. Do you have to determine the rules of engagement? Absolutely. But as John said, you have to be prepared to fight back. There's no sense in putting these planes up if they're just going to be there for show. This can't be just, like what we play in between the Bering Straits and between Alaska and Kamchatka, where there's just a show of force, but nothing really happens. I mean, this has to be an implemented no-fly zone that you carry through on if the Russians push it. I have a feeling that it may take one or two times, but Russia will get the message that Europe is going to fight back. Hopefully, that's the message that Europe would send, and B, that we can't beat that. We have no way of taking that fighter force out, so we have to change tactics. And hopefully, ideally, that makes them realize we can't win in Ukraine, and that creates leverage at the negotiating table that presently just doesn't exist. Something that Trump could have been doing. This is kind of leverage points that he could be creating, but he hasn't.
And David, we certainly can't announce publicly what those rules of engagement are either, because Russia will just work a plan that that bypasses them or circumvents those rules of engagement. You can't announce what your restrictions are. You just have to say they're up there, they're going to defend Ukraine, and they're going to defend themselves.
Well, we announce our negotiating points in public.
We always
do this.
We always do, and that's a problem that we have.
Well, let me ask you this. This will be the last question for today. We'll have to end it on this, but I think it's crucial. With any talk about a peace treaty, a peace negotiation, a ceasefire negotiation, or what have you, both sides are going to have to agree. And Putin has made it very clear publicly that he will not accept any NATO boots on the ground or aircraft in the air or ships at sea as part of any peacekeeping force. It could be a hybrid. It could be, I don't know what he's thinking. Like you said, he'll allow Turkey and China in there, certainly North Korea. But he said publicly he will not allow NATO troops in any way, shape, or form, singly or as a group, to patrol and protect Ukraine as part of any peace agreement. He just wrote that off. Do you believe that's just talk? Or if that's in fact the way he feels, then all of these negotiations are useless and a non-starter. I'll leave it with you for that as the last question for today.
That is exactly how he talks. Okay, that is exactly what he wants. Okay, but again, we said this earlier. When Putin says no, Trump says yes. Okay, no to this, and Trump will create another deal, if you will. But Trump seems to forget that he's negotiating on behalf of Ukraine and Europe without them in the room. Okay. At the end of the day, he thinks he's going to pull both of those entities into the equation. He's going to pull them in. And right now it looks like they're not being pulled. I mean, they're coming up with alternate solutions. So the one thing I think is probably the most frustrating thing for the Trump administration right now is that they have said publicly Europe needs to do more. But now that Europe's doing more, it's interfering in their plans. And now he may punish Europe for doing more with tariff against the EU, with withholding contracts, with, oh, by the way, if Europe separates itself from the gas lines and the oil lines, charging more money for gas and oil from the United States. He has tools that he can leverage Europe with. It just seems completely ironic that the very thing he wanted is what he's getting, and it's interfering in his plans. Again, very transactional. And I suspect the more Putin says no, the more Trump will step up and say yes to other things. Mark?
Yeah, I think where we're at is that Europe has got to create leverage for both itself and for Ukraine. And that's the only positive way forward out of this. Because at this point, Trump, as we mentioned at the very beginning of the show, is looking at this as a transactional negotiation. If he can get money out of it, great. But he wants to be done with Ukraine. But the problem is that Europe is not going to be done with Putin just because Ukraine ends. And they've got to do their calculus, their future defense posturing, if you will, with thinking of what Russia looks like 5 years from now. And so from that standpoint, I think the sooner that Europe shows resolve, the sooner that they indicate that we're going to back Ukraine fully, that this is not going to end on a capitulating type terms, that's all positive steps to be taken. Will they? Who knows, right? It's anyone's guess. I hope that they do. I hope that Macron backs it up. But John and I, maybe a year ago, lauded Emmanuel Macron for taking the lead, and then he kind of went AWOL. He talked the talk, but he didn't walk the walk. And so that's what we need to see. And part of a piece that we just wrote for the Daily Mail, we started to explore that. Who is going to step up in Europe and be that Churchill. Obviously, on a fighting element, that's been Zelensky, but it's going to take someone out of the UK, out of France, out of Germany, Poland. One of those leaders is going to have to step up and say, look, we've got to draw our own line in the sand. And they're starting to do that, but we've not yet seen one person emerge. Now, Macron, to his credit, made a great play for that in the speech that he gave. And certainly he was backed up by a French senator who eloquently said, look, this is, basically the fight of our times. We need to get behind it. But time will tell. Again, talk is the easy part. If they've got to start walking the walk. And yet, aside from small packages, I don't know that I've seen anything significant yet been awarded to Ukraine. I know Zelensky came out late last night basically saying, we've got a new package. There's more armaments coming our way. But it needs to be something that's bigger and better. And as John said, you don't necessarily have to announce it. You don't have to let the Russians know what the intention is, but you need to start delivering on it. And I just don't know that we've seen that yet.
I'd like a yes or no answer from both of you on this, and we'll end it on that. Gentlemen, is the war in Ukraine going to end, no matter what the circumstances are, in 2025? Yes or no?
No.
No.
No. Two no's. Okay. And I'm going to say, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know.
Like an intel guy, man.
Yeah, well, that's right.
I'm gonna do the caveat as the business guy here. Look, it may be a ceasefire, right? The fighting may stop, but that doesn't mean the war ends. The war is not going to end just because of quote unquote a peace deal.
Yeah, just look at Korea, 75 years plus, man. Still
I know. I was going to say that we've had a truce since 1953. So,
yep.
Gentlemen, thank you very much again. As always, I say this, we're going to have to do it again soon because literally the world changes every day. So, John Sweet, Mark Toth, you take care of yourselves, and we'll see you both again very soon. Take care and stay safe.
Hey, thanks, David.
Thanks, David.